Have you ever wondered what happens when power and arrogance meet the wrong person? Imagine an HOA board so entitled, so careless, that they thought they could bully anyone, only to discover they picked a fight with the one woman who held the law in her hands. This story begins in a quiet neighborhood, where families were about their days. Kids played on the sidewalks, and lawns stood neatly trimmed under the blazing summer sun. It looked peaceful. It looked perfect. But behind the smiling faces and the manicured hedges was something darker. An HOA that believed they could rule the community like kings and queens. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever dealt with people who believe rules are only for others, but not for themselves? That was this HOA. They didn't care about fairness. They cared about control. And when they saw the smallest chance to flex their power, they grabbed it with both hands. And their target? My daughter. Yes, my daughter. But here's the twist. She wasn't just anyone. She wasn't just a resident. She was the district attorney. The one person they should have thought twice about challenging. But arrogance blinds people. And the HOA had no idea who they were messing with. It all started with a letter. A simple piece of paper stuffed inside her mailbox. A fine notice. According to the HOA, my daughter had violated community rules by leaving her garbage bins out for too long. That's what they claimed. But here's the truth. The garbage trucks had been delayed. Everyone in the neighborhood still had their bins out. My daughters were no different. Yet, somehow, she was the only one fined. Suspicious, right? But it didn't stop there. A week later, another notice arrived. This time they accused her of parking her car the wrong way on the street. Another fine, a ridiculous one. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, a third notice landed at her door. This one claimed she had an unapproved structure in her backyard, a wooden playhouse for her kids, something that had been there for years without issue. Fine after fine, letter after letter. The HOA came after her like a predator circling its prey. But why? Why target her? Was it personal? Or was it greed? Here's where it gets interesting. When she looked closely at the HOA's records, she discovered something disturbing. The fines weren't just random. They were calculated. The HOA had recently voted to increase penalties in order to raise money for community projects. But instead of spreading fines evenly or enforcing them fairly, they singled out certain residents. And my daughter was one of their top targets. Let me pause here and ask you, have you ever been targeted unfairly? Have you ever felt like someone in power was using the rules against you, twisting them just to make your life harder? That's exactly how she felt. But the HOA had made one fatal mistake. They didn't realize who she was. See, my daughter wasn't the type to roll over. She wasn't going to pay quietly and let them walk all over her. She was a district attorney, a woman who had taken down corrupt officials, criminals, and fraudsters. She had faced liars in the courtroom and crushed them with facts. And now, the HOA had just stepped into her battlefield. Instead of getting scared, she smiled. And that smile meant trouble for them. The first thing she did was gather evidence. Every fine notice, every letter, every demand, they all went into a file. She took photos of her property, showing that her bins were no different from her neighbors. Her car was parked just like everyone else's, and her kids' playhouse was harmless. She even recorded conversations with HOA board members who arrogantly told her, "Rules are rules, and you'll pay whether you like it or not." They had no idea she was building a case against them. And trust me, this case was about to explode. Now, let me tell you something about power. People in authority often think they're untouchable. They believe no one can stop them. But when arrogance meets the law, arrogance always loses. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, she sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out before her. With every document she reviewed, her anger grew, not just because of what they had done to her, but because of what she realized. This HOA wasn't just targeting her. They were targeting others too. Elderly residents who didn't have the strength to fight back. Young families who couldn't afford legal battles. People who felt trapped because moving wasn't an option. The HOA had built their power on fear. But fear crumbles when someone dares to fight back. That night, she made her decision. She wouldn't just defend herself. She would defend every neighbor who had been bullied into silence. And that's when the real battle began. She started by sending the HOA a formal letter. Calm, professional, precise. She cited the exact laws they were breaking: consumer protection laws, fair housing regulations, and HOA statutes they clearly ignored. She demanded they revoke the fines, issue refunds, and stop targeting residents. Do you think they listened? Of course not. They laughed. They dismissed her letter, calling her overdramatic. They thought she was bluffing. But that was their biggest mistake yet, because she wasn't bluffing. She was building a storm that would tear through their empire of fear. She filed complaints with state regulators. She contacted the Attorney General's office. She gathered testimonies from neighbors who had been wronged, building a wall of evidence so strong it couldn't be ignored. The HOA had no idea what was coming. And then it happened. The first official notice landed at the HOA president's desk. Not a fine, but a legal summons. The state had opened an investigation. Imagine their shock. Imagine their panic. The very people who thought they were untouchable were now facing the law head-on. But here's the kicker. This was only the beginning. Because once you shine a light on corruption, the shadows start to scatter. And the HOA's secrets? They were darker than anyone imagined. Now I want to leave you with this question. What happens when those who thought they could control others suddenly lose control themselves? When the bully is dragged into the spotlight? When the hunter becomes the hunted? Stay with me, because in the next part, the battle doesn't just shake the HOA, it shatters their entire foundation. My daughter didn't just fight back. She made them pay for every single family they hurt. The HOA thought they had control. They thought they could bully, fine, and intimidate anyone in the neighborhood without consequence. But the moment that legal summons arrived, everything changed. Fear swept through the board like wildfire. The president, who once bragged about teaching residents a lesson, was now stuttering in meetings. The treasurer, who smiled while cashing fine checks, was suddenly quiet. And those smug letters they loved to send? They stopped, cold, because now they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. And my daughter, my fierce, unstoppable daughter, wasn't about to let them off easy. You see, once the state got involved, the HOA couldn't hide anymore. Investigators demanded their records. Every fine, every vote, every bank statement. And what they found? It was explosive. The HOA had been abusing their power for years. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were twisting them for profit. Selective fines, secret fees, overcharging for maintenance that never happened. And worst of all, funneling money into private accounts. It wasn't just unfair. It was fraud. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen arrogant people scramble when the truth comes out? It's almost satisfying. The same people who once stood tall, acting untouchable, now shrinking, panicking, making excuses. That's exactly what happened. When my daughter confronted them, face to face, they tried to dismiss her. You're just one resident. The HOA president sneered. You can't take down the entire board. But she didn't flinch. She leaned forward, looked him in the eye, and said, I'm not just a resident. I'm the district attorney. And you're going to wish you never sent me that first fine. Boom. Silence. The board froze. Because in that moment, they finally understood they weren't fighting a scared neighbor. They were fighting the law. And once the case went public, the entire community rallied behind her. Families who had been silent for years finally found their voices. They shared stories of intimidation, harassment, and threats. One elderly man described how they tried to fine him $500 for having flowers too tall. A young mother explained how they threatened foreclosure over a swing set. The stories poured in, and with each one, the HOA's walls crumbled further. But my daughter wasn't just collecting stories. She was building a case so airtight it could choke the life out of their corruption. She compiled testimonies, bank audits, legal precedents, all neatly tied together in a way only a DA could do. And then came the courtroom. Picture it. The board members sitting stiff in their suits, trying to look innocent. The president sweating under the lights. Their lawyer fumbling with his papers. And across from them, my daughter. Calm, sharp, relentless. The judge called the case, and from the very first word, it was clear this wasn't going to end well for the HOA. She presented her evidence with precision. Each document, each testimony, each financial record, a nail in the coffin of their defense. She exposed their lies one by one. She showed how they had targeted residents unfairly, how they had misused funds, how they had violated state laws again and again. At one point, the HOA's lawyer tried to argue that residents agreed to the rules when they moved in. But my daughter shot back instantly. Agreed to rules, yes. Agreed to corruption, fraud, and abuse of power? Absolutely not. That is not what they signed up for. And that is not what the law allows. The courtroom erupted. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. And from that moment on, the HOA's defense unraveled. By the time closing arguments came, it was obvious the HOA was finished. The judge ruled in favor of the residents, declaring the fines unlawful, ordering refunds, and launching a full-scale review of the HOA's management. But here's the best part. The board members themselves faced charges. Fraud, misuse of funds, harassment. They weren't just losing power. They were facing real consequences. Can you imagine the shock on their faces? The same people who once strutted around the neighborhood, barking orders and handing out fines, now being escorted out of the courtroom with their reputations shattered. Justice. Sweet, powerful justice. And as for my daughter, she didn't just win. She set an example. She showed every family in that neighborhood and beyond that you don't have to bow to bullies, that you can fight back, that when you stand up for what's right, even the strongest walls of corruption can fall. Neighbors who once whispered their frustrations now walk proudly. They planted flowers without fear. They parked their cars without checking over their shoulders. Kids laugh in the park again. The neighborhood, once ruled by fear, was finally free. But let me tell you the most powerful moment. After the trial, an elderly woman approached my daughter, tears in her eyes. She said, "For years, I thought I was powerless, but you showed me we are stronger than them. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us. And that is the kind of victory no fine, no rule, no board can ever take away." So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right. Never let arrogance go unchallenged. And never forget, sometimes the person you're trying to bully might just be the one person who can end your entire game. The HOA learned that the hard way. They tried to charge my daughter. They tried to scare her. They thought they could break her. But instead, they broke themselves. And you know what? That's a story worth remembering. Backhand index pointing right. If you've ever dealt with unfair HOAs, corrupt officials, or bullies in power, don't stay silent. Speak up. Fight back. Share your story. Because when people unite against injustice, no amount of greed or arrogance can stand in their way. This isn't just a story about one woman winning a case. It's about justice winning over fear. It's about truth cutting through lies. And it's about never letting the powerful forget one simple fact. No one is above the law.